Why do we need the maximum plus technique for this lens? So if you look at the defocus curve for the Tecnis Eyhance, you can see that it has a much broader sweet spot. So when we mean a broader sweet spot, means it's a little bit flatter, right? So when it's flatter in this way, there is every chance that the patient may end up having good distance vision even when the refractive outcome isn't perfect, right? So as opposed to Tecnis ZCB, which has a much steeper defocus curve, if the refractive outcome was off imetropia, then the visual acuity would be much different from what is expected, right, which is 20/20. Right, so when you have such a lens, you would need to perform a maximum plus refraction. The reason why we have such a broad sweet spot here on the Tecnis Eyhance is because of the higher order A-sphere optic, right? So as you can see, the difference between the Tecnis Eyhance and the Tecnis one-piece is that one-piece monofocal is that they have an increased power in the center of the optic, right? So there's a little bit more refractive power in the center of the optic, and it's gradually increasing, right? So it's not a distinct zone by itself, but there's just a gradual increase of refractive power to the center of the optic. Okay, so so as we mentioned before, if you performing the maximum plus refraction, then you have a higher chance of achieving the exact refractive power that's required to correct the patient, right? So this is what you want to achieve with the defocus curve eventually when you perform the refraction with maximum plus. Now, without maximum plus refraction, the patient can end up in this kind of refractive state, which is actually a hyperopic outcome, right? And still the patient is seeing 20/20 on the Snellen chart. So without refraction, with the maximum plus method, the patient coming into the practice can see 20/20, and it may be slightly hyperopic, but because of the broader landing zone, they're still able to see 20/20. Okay, so why not using the autorefractor? So basically, the autorefractor has uses more of the central part of the cornea to estimate the refraction. As we know, the central part of the lens is not is having a change in power. So using autorefractor will not give you the correct refractive power or the refractive state of the patient. Okay, so how to best achieve the maximum plus refraction? So the suggestion is to first measure the uncorrected distance visual acuity. So if the uncorrected distance visual acuity it's good, unusual practice, what happens is that you may not need to further do any tests, right? If the patient is happy with its visual acuity without any correction, then you may not need to continue with this test, right? Well, the only reason why you want to continue with this test is to find out what is the exact refractive outcome in order to do the personalization of the lens constant. But again, if you are performing the personalization of lens constant using a Tecnis ZCB monofocal lens way before you use the Eyhance lens, then this is not necessary as well. But if the patient is not seeing well with uncorrected distance VA, and the surgeon wants to find out what is the actual refractive error that's causing the visual acuity to drop, then they need to proceed to perform the maximum plus refraction. So recommended is to start with a plus 0.75 diopter trial lens. And what happens when you use a plus 0.75 diopter trial lens is that you induce myopia and you're shifting the defocus curve towards the right side, right? So away from the broad landing zone here, we're starting the refraction from this side here. So if you've seen it, what I've discussed with you last week, just to show that to you again, if we are performing maximum plus refraction and we are adding plus lenses, what happens is that the defocus curve shifts to the right side, all right? And this is what we are doing in terms of, so this is actually inducing myopia, right? And then as we are reducing the lens power, right, from a plus 0.75 and backing it down to plus 0.5, plus 0.25, 0, and then going to the minus lenses, what happens is this defocus curve is gradually shifting towards the left, right? So when it reaches the point where the patient is able to see 20/20, that's where this part of the defocus curve is meeting this line here. So as I mentioned, 0 doesn't mean the refractive power outcome of the patient, but it refers to the distance where the measurement was taken, where the visual acuity measurement was taken. So once it reaches 0, it means it's at distance vision, right? And that refractive error would be equal to the trial lens power that you have used to achieve a 20/20 at distance, right? So eventually, oops. So eventually, when this part of the defocus curve reaches this end here, the result may be, it may not be 0, it may be plus 0.25 or even minus 0.25. But that means that is the actual refractive error of the patient. Okay, now if you have added 0.75, plus 0.75, and still the VA drops less than 1 line, then you probably need to go even further and add an additional 0.75. So a total of plus 1.5. In case the initial addition of plus 0.75 didn't give you a sufficient drop in VA. So what does this mean is, probably means that the patient has got significant hyperopia to start off with, and when you're adding 0.75 here, it hasn't sufficiently defocused the patient to the extent that it had reduced the visual acuity. So you need to add an additional of 0.75 to make sure that the defocus curve shifts to the right side, and then we are starting the refraction from that point. So the best VA is reached when the patient no longer able to see letters after adding minus 0.25. So if you have reached a point where when you go one step beyond that, like for example at plus 0.25, when the patient sees 20/20 minus 2, and then you go one step further to put in a plano lens, that means dropping from plus 0.25 to plano, and the patient still sees 20/20 minus 2, it means the same result as previous, then the maximum plus refraction should be plus 0.25. So you go back to where you previously were, and that's the refractive error that you should take. Right, and that will represent your best sphere correction, and that can be represented as your spherical aberration, spherical equivalent correction that is required. If they want to further refine the refraction, then they can look for if they're still getting less than 20/20 on the VA chart despite the best sphere, then you may want to look for any residual astigmatism and correct that with the cylinder lenses as well. Okay, but once you get the best sphere correction, that is already indication of your spherical equivalent refractive error. So in terms of patient selection, one of the key thing to understand is that you should take this lens as a monofocal lens. So wherever a monofocal lens is being considered, the Eyhance, the Tecnis Eyhance would be similarly able to be considered in those circumstances. Right, it is comparable because it's comparable to the Tecnis one-piece monofocal. Statistically significantly, there's no statistically significant difference in distance VA, even in low contrast and low lighting conditions. So there's no reason to fear that the Tecnis Eyhance is not going to perform well. It's going to be as good as the Tecnis monofocal IOL. And also in terms of this photopsia or the side effects of vision, we don't expect the Tecnis Eyhance to be different from Tecnis one-piece monofocal. So in terms of the patient selection criteria, you can just follow the same criteria as what you would use with a Tecnis monofocal, right? So where the surgeon is comfortable to use a Tecnis monofocal, the Tecnis Eyhance would equally be comparable to the Tecnis monofocal. But in the test phase, so this is what is recommended in the test phase. So the test phase means if the surgeon is initially starting out using this lens, the recommendation is to start out with healthy eyes, right? Corneal astigmatism that's 0.75 diopters or less. No pupil abnormalities, previous refractive surgery, no ocular diseases that may cause that may affect the visual outcomes, and no abnormal pupil sizes. So this is just the test phase. I mean, this is what we want to suggest. Mainly is to get the get the surgeons to understand the capability of this lens better before they start using it for a broader range of patients. All right, so this is the clinical best practice deck that is so that's finished. So what I'm going to do now is to show you the FAQ. Okay, so for the Eyhance IOL FAQ, this is for internal use only, so do not distribute, but you can, when you have conversations with the doctor and when these questions arise, you can provide these responses. So what are the clinical implications of the Eyhance being inserted in the reverse, meaning that the IOL is flipped, so the there's a, in some situations if the lens got flipped in the eye, sometimes, and then the customer may ask you, what is the implication? So the implication is that, it would still work optically, it's similar, but the only thing is that the ProTech 360 edge design would become ineffective because right now that edge design is facing anterior as opposed to being in contact with the posterior capsule. So in terms of PCO reduction, it will be less effective than before, than if the lens was implanted in the correct way. And due to the angulation, as you know, with our trifix design, there is a slight angulation because of the offset of the optics from the haptics, and this will cause a slight myopia because the lens is a little bit more anterior. It's shifted a little bit more anterior. But in terms of what the lens is supposed to do, it will still work the same way. So that means it's still is able to provide that enhanced intermediate vision, and correct the vision, but of course there'll be a slight myopia. What is the clinical implication of angle kappa effect with higher order A-sphere technology? So angle kappa is the difference in the visual axis where the patient is looking through, and the actual position of the center based on the pupil center. So the pupil center and where the patient is actually looking through would be quite different. And the concern here is if the patient is looking through other than the exact center of the lens, is that going to cause problems, right? So the response is that angle kappa mainly results from the tilt of the IOL, but we know that the Tecnis Eyhance provides the far vision comparable to standard aspheric IOL. The tolerance of the tilt and decentration of the Eyhance is similar to Tecnis monofocal, right? So we should not have additional concerns with regards to angle kappa, right? So the tolerance rate of tilt and decentration with Tecnis one piece, it's 10 degrees, it's up to 10 degrees of tilt and up to 0.8 millimeters of decentration, right? So that's a significant amount of tolerance that the lens could be able to provide, right? So the next question, in patients with advanced AMD or some glaucoma, optic neuropathy, will contrast be negatively impacted? Right, so the answer is that you just treat this Tecnis Eyhance as a monofocal lens. So if they are comfortable to implant a standard monofocal in such patients, then this lens could be used in a similar way, right? And it is not, it should be emphasized that it is not a multifocal lens. So the risk profile is really similar to what you would see in a Tecnis monofocal. So the simple answer is not, it won't be a concern if you have no concern with a monofocal lens implanted. For lens selection to target emmetropia for Eyhance, which would be the first selection? So how do you select the Tecnis Eyhance IOL power, right? So some may ask, do you recommend first plus or first minus? Alright, so the simple answer to that is to choose the lens power that's closest to emmetropia, right, to optimize the distance outcomes. But they should just use this lens as how they would use a Tecnis ZCB or a monofocal lens. So whatever their practice in using a standard monofocal, they can expect the same performance with this. The same performance in terms of distance with Eyhance. Of course, it will provide the enhanced intermediate, right? So in terms of targeting, they can just follow the same way that they're targeting with their standard monofocal. Or you can give them an answer which is, to get as close to emmetropia as possible. What is the effective zone of the Tecnis Eyhance? How much is the zone? What is the area of the zone with which is with refractive technology? So we need to emphasize that if there's any comment or any question relates to what is the zone, where's the effective zone, we got to make sure to emphasize that there's no zones on the Eyhance IOL. So a zone means that there is a distinct power change from the other parts of the lens, but in this lens there is no distinct power change, so there is no zones defined on the Tecnis Eyhance, right? Instead, you probably want to further explain that it is not a distinct zone, but it is a continuous power progression across the entire surface of the lens, right? So where there is a little bit more change in power to get the enhanced intermediate, it's in the center of the optics, right? And that's in only about 15% of the surface of the Tecnis Eyhance, right? So if you compare the Tecnis Eyhance with the Tecnis one-piece IOL, 85% of the surface of the Eyhance is the same. So that 85% is the surrounding area apart from the center of the optics, right? So the 15%, right, of the surface, which is gradually changing in power, it's what makes the Tecnis Eyhance different from Tecnis one-piece IOL. How does the higher order A-sphere affect clinical outcomes if decentralization occurs? Right, so it's similar to what was discussed earlier in terms of the kappa angle and decentration concern, right? So again, there should not be concern too much about the decentralization, because in terms of the performance, this lens is similar to the Tecnis monofocal, right? And it's comparable in terms of decentration and tilt, right? Which again, it's 10 degrees of tilt and 0.8 millimeters of decentration. Does Tecnis Eyhance IOL higher order A-sphere lens technology induce higher order aberrations such as coma? So if you are not familiar with coma, coma is a kind of higher order aberration which is not symmetrical, it's not rotationally symmetrical. So it is not definitely not inducing higher order aberrations such as coma, right? Because the surface of this Tecnis Eyhance lens is rotationally symmetrical, right? So it does not induce such asymmetric higher order aberrations, right? What is the light transmission in percentage for Tecnis Eyhance? It is not a diffractive lens, and it's not a multifocal lens or a EDOF lens, right? So like any monofocal lens, it allows all the light to pass through without any diffractive loss in light, right? Or any loss in light due to a split focus. But this lens, it's, you would say that it has the same light transmission as our standard monofocal lens. So this one is quite interesting because it shows you how the profile of the Tecnis Eyhance lens looks like. So as we mentioned earlier on, the most part of the lens, so if you look at this, is a side profile of the lens from the center to the edge of the optic. So that is coming to about 3 millimeters if you go extend beyond this, right? And you can see from that 0.5 millimeter to the other parts of the optic here, there's actually no change in the profile of the lens. So the lens power profile remains the same as your standard Tecnis monofocal. Where the change occurs is in the central part of the optic. So the central 1 millimeter area, I mean, we won't call it a zone, but that's where the changes start, right? So from the 0.5 millimeter radius outwards towards the center, that's where you see a slight change in the profile of the lens, creating a change in the refractive power, right, towards the center of the lens. So you can see with the Tecnis Eyhance, it's a little bit more curvature as compared to the standard monofocal lens, right? So with that slight increase in curve, that's where you get the increase, the slight, that continuous change in the refractive power. Okay, what is the add power of Tecnis Eyhance IOL? So again, if there's any mention of add power, you've got to address it, that it is not having an add power, right? So add power, it's a term that you use for multifocal lenses where you put in additional refractive power for near vision, specifically for near vision, and there is a distinct addition of that power. So that refers to a distinct zone or some diffractive steps that can give you a very distinct amount of add power. But for Tecnis Eyhance, there's no such thing as an add power because the refractive power changes increasingly, right? Increasing from the periphery to the center of the lens, created by a higher order A sphere. So the term is higher order A sphere. This is how we create that increase in power. And because it's a continuously change in the shape and the change in power, it does not have these zones or diffractive rings or any distinct change in power. Right, so that's why we would not say that it has an add power. Okay, so basically that's it. That's what we have on the FAQ. So perhaps now it's a good time to have some of our Indian colleagues to provide some other comments. Hannah?
Hi. Hi, Melvin.
Yeah, hi.
Thank you so much. Yep, we're really lucky today to have Ishfaq and Saddam from the India team with us, who played a crucial role in the successful Eyhance launch in India. So it would be fantastic now if we can hand over to Saddam and Ishfaq to share maybe first of all any tips or pearls that they learnt from the launch process in India. Hi, Saddam. I think they're both on mute. Ishfaq, are you with us?
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi, Ishfaq.
Hi,
How
Hannah.
are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Hi, Ishaq.
Welcome. Ishfaq, if you could possibly share any of the insights that you learned, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I think starting from the launch, when we had KOL launch in the beginning, that is where we involved all the KOLs. That is going to be crucial. So because we could leverage the experience in each region, we had KOLs from each region where almost average they implanted 15 to 20 IOLs in the beginning in the launch process. And then they had a experience. It was so overwhelming that few of the surgeons, they started comparing with Symphony also because they got such a good outcome. I'll come to that point later. So the point is that KOL launch is going to be a crucial. Second thing is what we did, that we encouraged the participants to make sure that each of the surgeon has to be comfortable in terms of biometry. They don't have to do any changes in the biometry, right? There is no learning curve. in this. Whatever currently they are doing, they have to continue the same process, right? So they don't have to specifically change the A constant. If they are getting good outcomes with the Tecnis or any monofocal, they have to continue the same thing. That is where we encourage the surgeon to use this IOL and see the experience, right? So that's why we got a lot of success. And the other thing, what we did, we encouraged the participants to attend the OR initially in the beginning, possibly 2 to 3 cases, to make sure that whatever we have communicated to the surgeon, they are following the same. And the other thing is that some of the surgeons initially they want to try in the complicated cases, right? As Melvin was telling, that initially to build the confidence of the surgeon, we have to make sure that they implant the IOL in the healthy eyes. So when we are in the OR, we make sure that those 2, 3 cases go in the right way, they build the confidence, and then we collect the post-op data as usual, right? So that was one thing. The other thing what we did differently is that immediately after the launch, 2, 3 months, we had internal sales team webinars where across region we connected, and we had participants to share their success along with the challenges. So that was one way to get the perspective that where we are standing, how we are doing, what else we need to address further, right? And then the other thing what we did, possibly every region has done that the A accounts, where we targeted a lot of A accounts and we got a good success. So we had some of the surgeons who had never used Tecnis for 5-10 years because there were multiple reasons, whether they were using Alcon or any other. So there we got a lot of success. So in each region we had encouraged the team members to at least visit 5 to 6 customers in their region and try to encourage the surgeon to use that. That also give a lot of success. And the other thing we need to be mindful that we have to encourage the surgeon or make sure that they are targeting emmetropia. So in the launch process, we had some of the surgeons who targeted either myopia or hyperopia. Some of the surgeons, they got a good outcome. They started comparing with Symphony, but the consistency was not there. So we have to encourage the surgeon that this lens is meant for distance first. So we don't want the surgeons to do myopia or hyperopia and things go wrong, because first the distance should not be compromised, right? So that is where we have to make sure that whatever surgeons initially they are doing, they have to target emmetropia, and bilateral is always good, right? So we also encourage the surgeon to do bilateral implants to get the good outcome. And the other thing we need to be mindful that the A constant, where even if it is our key account or B account also, B2 accounts, or our KOL who is using consistently Tecnis. So we had some of the surgeons, they were using Tecnis 3-piece, where you know that A constant is different, right? So we have to make sure that they have to use, whoever surgeons, the Tecnis, they are not using single piece, they are using Tecnis 3-piece. There is where we need to see that what A constant they are using, right? So A constant is going to play a big role. If they are using Tecnis single piece or any other single piece, they can continue with the same. So I think these are the things which we made sure that the right patient selection. Then we encourage a lot of surgeons to use this, share their experiences. That also give a lot of success and a lot of motivation to the internal team also. Right, so that is, I think, some of the things which we did. Yeah.
Thank you, Ishfaq. That's fantastic. Those are really helpful tips. Do you happen to know how many Eyhance cases, sorry if you mentioned this, how many Eyhance cases you've done in India so far?
I think it should be maybe more than 10,000. I don't know the exact number, but yes, wow. It should be done. Yeah. So we had a great success.
Hannah, let me take that. Sorry, good morning, everyone. Sadhan here. I was just muted. Sorry about that. And thank you, Hannah, for arranging such an impactful platform where everyone from the region can log in, share their experiences, learn from each other. And we are truly humbled to have our experience on Eyhance being shared here. This should be a continuity, I would reckon. A couple of thoughts that occur to me as we see that Eyhance really has rewritten the rule of the game, so to say, in India. When it comes to monofocals, most of the surgeons have got now unanimous voice that they are, if not they're already using Eyhance as their go-to preference. They are open to experiment, even the staunchest of the A account. So that's the kind of credibility this lens has carved out for itself in less than 5 months. As we speak today, our IMS till date would have surpassed 25,000 lenses.
Wow.
So that's the kind of and this figure I'm talking about. Let me correct myself. This figure I'm talking about end of January. So within 3 months, that was the kind of performance this lens has gathered. In terms of the implantation, we see most of the implantation figures would be somewhere close to 30 to 45% of their IMS performances. So that's the volume of confidence that this is not just about the stocks or the initial euphoria. Actually, the lenses are going into the eyes, and that's great to hear. And every quarter we have got some or the other customer engagement programs, thanks to the marketing team's robust drive on that. We have been doing a panel of KOL-driven CMEs for rest of the organization, mostly under the aegis of Ophthalmological Society of India, which has really given that legitimacy to the entire claim. So that was a great kind of a boost for all of us. As Ishfaq was talking about, that there might have been some initial what you call, say, overzealousness in some of the surgeons to go overboard and claiming that it has performance similar to many of the multifocal lenses, and more specifically, some people even drew comparison with Symphony, which I think I should talk a little more here. That's where we shouldn't get trapped into. And in fact, many of our competition would like us to have that play, but we must go for a no zone in that case. We must be very clear that this is no way we are competing or positioning against any of these multifocals or EDOF, even if it has got a landing zone far wider compared to the standard monofocal. So it has really rewritten the rule of the existing monofocal, and let that be the mantra for our promotional line. It's an augmented monofocal, but definitely, as Ishfaq was mentioning, the first target should be to have a superb distance visual acuity, and then possibly look into as an add-on for intermediate range. And when people are given the right kind of expectation during their counseling, that's where the magic happens for this particular lens. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
one more training initiative that in India we did. We did in the not only in the initial stage, but we have been continuing that with, and that's where most of our associates are asked to present one or the other segment of this particular lens. And this does not hold here only for Tecnis Eyhance. This is what we call flipped classes, where participants are given 5-minute slot to present back to their peers on certain dimension of any product. And more specifically, this has been a quite common phenomena which Ishfaq has been quite successfully driving, is about Tecnis Eyhance. So people get that opportunity to present back their clinical experiences and their understanding. That's a great way to learn from each other, I would guess.
Yes, absolutely. So all of that is vital. Both Sadan and Ishfaq, thank you so much. Both of those tips are fantastic. Could you possibly share any early, well, it's not even early anymore, any sort of feedback, more feedback that you're getting from the customers that are repurchasing?
What was the last segment? I just missed out.
So is there any sort of feedback, more feedback you can share from the customers who are repurchasing Eyhance on a regular basis, who they're high volume users?
Yeah, we had recently, I think a couple of days back, one of the webinar where our KOL presented. He has done more than 500 implants. So he has completely shifted from Tecnis 1 to Eyhance. So his first standard care is Tecnis Eyhance. So I think that is the kind of success we have. And other surgeons also, we have a lot of KLs, high volume, where they have been using consistently. And this is one of the KL where we engaged recently, where we involved more than I think 300, 400 surgeons were there in the webinar. So he shared his experience that how was his experience with the Eyhance and why did he shift it from Tecnis to Eyhance. So I think, yeah.
That's testament itself. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just going to turn quickly to the chat box. It's a real Eyhance celebration today. David Walker from the ANZ market has just shared that ANZ has done approximately 8,000 Eyhance and continues to grow. March was about 1,500 units and ZC Boo was about 2,200 units. So Eyhance truly is growing phenomenally. So congratulations ANZ, and obviously congratulations India team for a very successful launch as well that you did recently. So there's a few questions we have in the chat box as well, and I'd like to open this up to, of course, to Melvin and to answer, and to our, our special guests, to Ishfaq and Saran, but also to the ANZ team, David and Melinda, Glenn, whoever else we have on the line. If you could help share any answers for this question here from Kian Lam. May I know, how do you convince the surgeon to charge more to the patient? So this is a typical objection handling question, but are there any particular key things you've seen winning in your markets that could help answer this question? Maybe perhaps Sadan and Ishfaq, over to you first.
Yeah, I think the best way what we have seen where KOLs have also shared that they always under-promise to the patient, right, and over-deliver. That is where they got a success. So it's not like they will tell the patient that this is the only lens or you will get the near or intermediate. No. So this is something where apart from the regular monofocal, you will be able to do the lot of activities. So we had a lot of pictorial presentations where surgeons were able to convince the patients, like how does it make a difference. So that is where I think is a key, where they can encourage the counselors also to make sure that you don't over-promise, right? We have to always under-promise and over-deliver to make sure that, yes, patient, we have to convince them, and different ways of convincing. Like some of the surgeons who are very successful, they show the pictorial presentations, a lot of surgeons, and the testimonials also is going to help.
Yeah. Yeah, so using some of the graphics that we've provided to help explain that.
To add to that, Anna, the key for any new launches is to build the value over the existing one. If you really want to charge a premium for that matter, Tecnis Eyhance was no different in that sense. However, as the field experience are emerging thick and fast, definitely what is a commonality that drives among most of the regular or the heavy users of Eyhance is the fact that most of them have marginally priced up compared to the existing monofocal practice. If you wish in terms of percentage point, it wouldn't be more than 15 to 20% markup compared to the existing monofocal packages. I'm talking about the higher bracket. In some of the cases where volumes have really come thick and fast, they have marked up even in single digit percentage points, so less than 10% markup with the existing monofocal packages. So many surgeons have deliberately shunned the temptation to charge very premium compared to the existing monofocal practices. Though cases might vary surgeon to surgeons, but this is the trend overall. Don't go for tempting and charge heavily marked up compared to the existing one.
Right, got it. Thank you, Sadan. Perhaps anybody from ANZ, maybe David, do you have any pearls you can share here as well of how your surgeons are able to convince the patients of the extra charge?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to hear from Gina or Pierre or Andrew, who are also on the line. But in general, in Australia, Eyhance is not a basic lens. It's more not a premium lens, but somewhere in the middle. And it's reimbursed for most patients who get it. So price is not really an issue. But we charge about 25% more on top of a ZCB, for example. And our justification for that is that it provides more. It's basically halfway to a PCIOL. And a lot of customers are tempted to do monovision as well to try and get a much fuller range of vision. So basically the patient is getting much, much more.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we justify charging more.
Yeah.
The other thing too is the fact that there's a very, very large patient population or you know, more elderly patients who they can see the value of intermediate, but without the added issues of halo glare, etc., that you might get with an EDOF or true PCIOL. So that's where they're also seeing that benefit to position.
Great. No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. We've actually had a comment coming in as well to add in. I think Eunice just sent a message in as well, but I can't see it. Melvin, can you see the message from Eunice? Okay.
Yeah.
So
not yet.
Eunice is asking a question actually. So Korean surgeons often compare Tecnis Eyhance with Lentis Comfort. Any tips in communication to clearly differentiate the two? So, well, first of all, I can add in, Eunice, that we are building a competitive IOL compendium to talk about the significant differences between Tecnis Eyhance and any other competitive lenses. Lentis Comfort in specific, I'm not too aware of right now. But I know we have some people on the line who may do. David, do you have David Walker? Do you have Lentis Comfort in ANZ?
Yeah, we do, but I don't know enough about it to comment. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. I mean, and I think actually we might have Michelle or Charmaine on the line from regional marketing who may be able to shed a little bit more light. Are you there, Michelle or Charmaine?
Hi, Hannah. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes. Welcome. Hi.
Yep. So I think just referencing to your earlier questions about the how do we get a premium, right? I think from an APJ standpoint, on top of what we have discussed about managing expectation as well as the value of intermediate vision, I think across the region, there's a few other themes that works as well. So I think first is that in the monofocal category, we are the first in terms of creating a new optics offering intermediate vision. So I think that is a very strong value proposition, being a first mover advantage there. And then riding on the fact on Tecnis platform being a very easy to use, having the same A constant throughout our platform does encourage a lot of doctors to actually try. And in terms of the patient expectations or the doctor's expectations, we do have two approach. In some markets, the doctors actually absorb the cost of offering the enhanced intermediate vision in the hope that they will be able to get better patient satisfaction. So the cost is being absorbed by the surgeon, and then once they have very good satisfaction, they are hoping that they will be able to get more referrals from the patient themselves. So that's a form of marketing for them. And on the other hand, some doctors actually pass it on to the patient. And of course, what they do is they do manage their expectation that, you know, this is giving the value of the enhanced intermediate vision. So there are two different, I would say generally two approaches to how we see it in the market. And of course, the results that the surgeons are getting has been great, which is why the lenses have been picking up really aggressively and growing in the market. So if we are looking at answering Eunice's questions around Lentis Comfort, I think Comfort generally it's more visible in Malaysia and Japan. So Japan, they managed to get it under reimbursement. And of course, Korea, it's also part of the dynamics where Lentis Comfort is relatively strong. So I would say that Lentis Comfort generally works on the optics of add power. Is actually a multifocal. So if we have to look into the optics being a multifocal and add power, which is a zonal kind of lens, then definitely from a dysphotopsia profile standpoint, it will not be able to comparable to Eyhance. So Eyhance will have better dysphotopsia profile compared to Lentis Comfort. That will be definitely one area that we can be pushing from a messaging standpoint.
Yeah. absolutely. Good point.
Can I just ask you, is Lentis Comfort what we have as Oculentis?
Yes, it is, Gina.
Okay. Well, we do have that quite strongly in the market here, don't we, Glenn? It's just that our experience has been so far that I feel like it's a little bit more against Symphony than Eyhance.
Yeah. Comparing it to Symphony more, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, 'cause it gives more near than we get with Eyhance.
It's got about a 1.5 diopter add, and it's being a segmented bifocal. It actually has some specific negatives with respect to dysphotopsia. It's quite famous for what's called the angel wing dysphotopsia.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, instead of having a circular halo, it's more of a fan effect coming down and away if the segment is mounted down in the IOL. If the segment is rotated up, then the fan goes up. But it's quite a specific dysphotopsia that patients experience, called that, and they call it the angel wing. So it's kind of a fan effect.
Yeah. So I personally, I wouldn't sell head-to-head on that, just because of, like, if they're happy for intermediate and they want the less side effects, but if they're looking for a certain amount of, say, reading or near or whatever, then they're going to get that with Lentis and not with Eyhance potentially. So once we realised this, it became quite easy, because I was no longer having those conversations between the two, because they really are in different categories. So, and as Glenn said, they have downsides to them. So.
Right. Excellent. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Glenn. That's really helpful. And a big thank you to Michelle. Michelle, that was great. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you
And
for
one
sharing
more
that.
thing, right? Just adding on that Lentis Comfort is working on a hydrophilic platform, so it can lead to higher PCO rate as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the explantation actually in Europe has been fairly high for Lentis Comfort.
Interesting. Good to know. So higher PCO rates potentially and high explantation rate. That's never a good thing. Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. And we just had one last question, I think, here in the chat box. Again, it's competitor related, and I will make a call out here that we are collaborating regionally and globally to build a competitive IOL compendium, which we're working on really hard at the moment to try and make sure you have an easy-to-use resource to be able to compare platforms. But just if anybody on the line has any information about comparing ICBU with Miniwell Ready IOL, I've never even heard of it, which makes me nervous. Anyone on the line?
Miniwell's SIFI, Hannah. So it's
okay.
It's from SIFI. It's the design of it is based on aspheric, so it's alternating zones of asphericity. It's an interesting design. It's one that's been around for a little while, and Hoya had a similar design about, I want to say 10 years ago, that wasn't terribly successful. They do suffer from glare and halo issues because of the junctions of the aspheric zones. So we don't have it in Australia, but I happen to know the guy who runs Asia pretty well. I used to work with him. And I know he's trying to bring those lenses into the Asian markets fairly swiftly.
Okay, so I'm adding that to my list.